Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our lunchtime presentation with the great Brian Wood, who is going to talk about the Botswana in depth. Sorry, you're going to talk about the best of Botswana itinerary in depth. Getting my words muddled up. Brian, we've got a lot of people on the presentation already, on the webinar already, so I'm going to mute myself and hand over to you, and please do shout at the end if you want me to pose questions to you, but I'll leave it to you. Fire away.
Okay, well, hopefully we've got everybody on board who's going to join us now, so we'll just head off straight away. I'd just like to comment at the beginning, if you want to make any comments or if you have any questions during the course of the presentation, you can either click on chat or you can click on Q&A. However, I won't respond until right at the end of the presentation. And also towards the end, you may see a question or two popping up on the screen. We'd be very grateful if you could answer these. Well, the best of Botswana. I last visited Botswana back in June of 2018. Seems like a very long time ago now. And I'm going to take you through that trip, which operates between June and October, to the land of the Tswana people. Now, with only more or less 2 million inhabitants in an area just a little bit larger than France, Botswana is one of the world's most sparsely populated countries. As you can see from this map, it's landlocked in the middle of southern Africa, lying between RSA, the Republic of South Africa, Namibia to the west, Angola to the north, although it doesn't actually have a border with Angola, Zambia to the north, and with Zambia, the border is a mere 700 meters long, 700 meters and a ferry crossing. And then Zimbabwe lies to the east. Botswana, of course, as many of you will remember, was known as Bechuanaland until independence, which took place in 1966. It's a stable, democratic, relatively corruption-free country. The economy is based on mining for diamonds, for gold, for copper, and for uranium, as well as cattle rearing and tourism. So these days, it's a relatively prosperous and fast-growing kind of place. And of course, it was made famous by Alexander McCall Smith with his novels about the ladies' number one detective agency. Right, so this is a 12-day luxury mobile camping safari. Keywords, because Botswana's lodges are notoriously expensive. So this camping trip is a fantastic and, importantly, an affordable way to see its remarkable wildlife. There's no direct flight to Botswana, so to get there you need to fly overnight to Joburg, that's around about 11 hours, and then there's a short connecting flight from Joburg to Maun, which is the hub for the Okavango Delta, and that flight is under 2 hours, about an hour and 3/4. You then spend 10 days in the country, and then it's overnight flights back from Kasane at the end, similarly via Joburg, a couple of hours down to Joburg and 11 hours back to London. And in the country, we stay in 3 different locations. Now, the 3 campsites that we use are not fixed. Each tour, the campsites may be in different locations because they're allocated by Botswana National Parks and the Kwai Community Trust on a rota basis. But the important thing is the campsites are exclusive to our group. They're big enough for maybe up to 10 tents, and then there's separate quarters for separate area for staff quarters and for the kitchen. They're generally located in a thicket or a stand of trees, so there's always some shade, but all the water has to be brought in from outside. So this is really the quintessential camping safari, bush camping safari. And there you can see the mess tent, the vehicles, and one of the kind of tents that you'll be staying in. And those are pretty spacious. There's ample room to stand up and move around. The windows, and there's windows on all sides, are all covered with mosquito-proof mesh screens. There's a bedside table, there's rugs on the floor, on the ground sheet, of course, integrated ground sheet. Double or twin beds, which are equipped with sheets, duvets, and extra blankets. There's an LED light, but I would still recommend very much that you take your own good head torch for moving around outside. Plus, you have an ensuite outside bathroom with a bush shower and a long drop toilet. Now, if any of you are wondering what a bush shower is, in that private ensuite bathroom at the rear of the tent, there's a canvas bucket that hangs from a gallows-like support. And the camp crew will fill this to order with your choice, hot, warm, or cold water. Then they'll hoist it up on the gallows, secure it, and Bob's your uncle. There's enough water in there for a decent shower, but just make sure you get all the suds off before it runs out. There's a mess tent, which is spacious, ample room, and you'll note that there's 12 people sitting at table plus a driver guide, because this is a double group. So the meals are part served. For example, soup is served at table, but the majority of the rest of them is a buffet. You can go up to the buffet table and help yourself. You certainly won't go hungry, because the chef works some, well, I was going to say minor miracles, they're more like major miracles. When you see the old Dutch oven that he uses, a very primitive way of cooking, on an open fire and in the Dutch oven, but still manages to produce fresh bread and cakes and muffins every day. Sometimes we eat out under the stars, which is a great way to spend the evening. That depends on the location, obviously the weather, the temperature, the wind, or occasionally if the crew need to start packing up early in the evening prior to moving camp the next morning. The daily routine while you're on safari is pretty self-explanatory. Not that there's anything, it has to be said, particularly routine about this. Early morning start, light breakfast before heading off, a morning game drive, stop in the middle of the morning, back to camp in the middle of the day with lots of time to have lunch and have showers before afternoon tea, followed by a game drive, and then getting back to camp round about 6 o'clock, 6:30, depends on the light, but that is mandatory when we're in Botswana National Park, i.e. Moremi or Chobe National Park. Then drinks around the campfire, and dinner at 7:30, or we may go out on a night drive for the 3 nights when we stay in the private concession of Moremi, of Kwai rather. The heart of the campsite is the campfire. That's where we have our pre-dinner drinks and our post-dinner chat. I have to say that 9 o'clock is considered a late night. Once or twice on this safari, we pushed it to 10 o'clock when we were stargazing, but that really was a late night in safari terms. The kind of vehicles we use for our game viewing are purpose-built, open-sided Toyota Land Cruisers. And these guys these days are the workhorses of the safari industry. They've largely replaced Land Rovers, although the good old British Land Rover still has its advocates, but these things are rather more comfortable. They have a roof for shade, as you can see. They're built to carry 10 plus a driver, in as much as there are 10 seats, but we use them for no more than 6 people at maximum. So if we have one of those double groups, we take 2 cars, each of which has 6 people. And the vehicles are equipped with a fridge, a DC-AC inverter, which you can use to charge camera batteries. They have bean bags for cameras, etc. And they have 3 rows of seats, which are stepped. And this, you can see from this slide that we never use the middle seat. So wherever you are on the vehicle, you'll always have an outside seat for photography. And we have a policy of rotation as well. And if you like, you don't have to do it, but it's always possible. You can take turns to use the spotter's seat beside the driver guide. But I should warn you, that's pretty low down, so you don't necessarily get the best views, and there's a lot less shade. So beware safari arm, that red arm. As I said before, most of the groups operate with a single vehicle, i.e. a group size of 6, but the occasional departure, we double up with 2 vehicles, so take a total of 12 people, although the vehicles often spend much of the day running separately. They're in radio contact, but they're off doing their own thing, and the two groups will only see each other in camp. And that camp involves fully serviced camping, i.e. you don't have to lift a finger. There are no chores to do at all, because there's a camp crew of 4 or 5 people, such as the delightful Mariko Bocciarello, who's our lovely, fun, always laughing waitress. There's a camp chef, and there's a camp manager, such as Peter Mfareki. He's very much the strong, silent type. And then there's a tent boy to do a lot of the minor chores. And I have to say that getting to know them and hearing something of their story, developing a bit of a rapport and gaining insights into their life, adds what I think is a really important social, cultural dimension to the trip. There's also a driver guide, 2 for a group of 12, obviously. And this is Habatcholwe Disho, who, for obvious reasons, is known as Dish. And Dish is a kind of Renaissance man with an exceptional eye, extraordinary knowledge of wildlife and habitat, and an uncanny knack for locating wildlife and predicting its movements. And in fact, all the guides have the same amazing skills. Now, Botswana, you can essentially divide into 3 very distinct regions. This trip covers only the northern region, the one in that pinky color that I noted on the Farrow and Ball paint chart the other day. Farrow and Ball refer to it as Nancy's blushes. Anyway, that northern region is the Okavango-Chobe region, which contains the Okavango Delta and the reserves of Chobe National Park, Moremi Game Reserve, which are the 2 contiguous green splodges that you can see right in the north. And then the other regions to the south, well, those areas are the ones that have borders with Namibia, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Further down, you can see in Farrow and Ball babouche color, that yellowy color, the Kalahari Desert, which is sparsely populated desert and its fringes. And then on the blue down to the southeast is the area of the capital of the country, Gaborone, which is about 10% of the population. And in fact, most of the rest of the population of the country live down there as well. But we're going to focus on that area around the Okavango Delta. And you can see from this map, well, we get straight into it. We fly into Maun, the hub for the Delta, down in the middle on the southern edge. And after a few hours stop in Johannesburg, we get to Maun around about the middle of the afternoon, get off, pass through immigration, customs, meet our guide, load the vehicles, and then we've got 2 to 3 hours drive northeast into Moremi Game Reserve, following that yellow road, and we enter through South Gate. We won't get to camp until after dark, but from South Gate to whichever campsite we're using, whichever campsite we've been allocated, may take an hour or something, and that is really our first game drive of the trip, because as the sun is going down, we are seeing our first wildlife. Now, what follows from this point onwards is a kind of a warts and all photo record of our game drives over the next 10 days. I should stress that I am no photographer, so don't expect the photographic extravaganza that you've become used to if you've been following these presentations over the last few weeks. I simply can't cut the mustard when it comes to photographs. So, next morning, we rise early and we head off as dawn is rising to get the best of the day. When the bush is waking up, the light is nice and soft, and there's lots of contrast. And importantly, the nocturnal predators are still at large and active. And rather than the predator, this of course is a prey species. This is the semi-aquatic red lechwe. These guys are diurnal grazers, especially early morning and late afternoon. They depend on water, and they have to drink about 3 times a day. we start getting familiar with the bird life. Some of it looks pretty familiar, as with this Cape turtle dove, it looks pretty much like our pigeons. The cats here are a little bit larger than they are at home, as you can see from this big male lion, but they're still pretty relaxed. So after a mid-morning coffee break, we head back to lunch, have a shower, laze, write diary, download pictures, process them. And then mid-afternoon, after a cup of tea and a cake, we head out again until nightfall, or later, depending if we're in a national park. This is a male kudu, and immediately you find that your eyes are gradually getting more and more attuned, and you start seeing things more easily, although some things are not that difficult to see, such as this large female elephant. And in fact, as throughout the trip, there are lots of elephants around. They're absolutely everywhere. And where there's water, there's hippos, and quite often we come across elephant and hippos cohabiting, and it's a great sight to see them. I mean, this is a matriarchal group, obviously off on a mission as the sun is getting low. As well as the big mammals, there's lots of bird life around. Now, this isn't specifically a birding trip, but we do see a lot of birds, such as these Egyptian geese. And birds kind of fill in the in-between times when there may not be a lot of mammal action, or simply when we're moving around, driving from one place to the other. So the bird life is kind of the punctuation to the safari. The next morning, we headed out very early in the morning, and on our dawn game drive, we spotted trees full of white-headed, white-backed and lappet-faced vultures, which is a pretty good indication that there's a kill around. And sure enough, our sharp-eyed driver guide Dish spotted a male lion on a kill, which just happened to be a waterbuck. And we pulled up to watch from close up as it had a good old gnaw. Well, it's a bit gory, isn't it? But that's life, as they say. But then, to our absolute surprise, remarkably close to the lion, we spotted a leopard in the long grass. And we followed that for a while as it prospected. Pretty soon after that, we came across a wattled crane, which is the largest of the African cranes. It's only about 8,000 cranes in the world of these guys, the wattled crane, and about a quarter, 2,000 of them maybe, are found in southern Africa. Impalas are common. The joy about impalas, I mean, they're quite fun to watch, but they're not hugely exciting, but they make very good sentinels because they're aware of everything that takes place in the bush, and their survival depends on it. So it's worthwhile keeping an eye out for the impalas and look where they're looking and watch what they're watching, because they're very good at giving away the movement of other animals, as do helmeted guinea fowls, which start chittering away as soon as they sense danger. And they too are always aware of whoever's in the vicinity. And in this case, it was another leopard already. You know, this is our second leopard that we picked up. So we parked up and watched this guy for a while, just waiting for something to happen, or waiting for the perfect light, the perfect look, whatever. And this is a female, in fact, so we watched her get into position high up on a kopje, a little hill, scanning the surroundings for a possible meal. And that was really the highlight of our afternoon trip. The next morning, we headed off again. This is day 4 by now. Day 4 since leaving London, I should say. And our first sighting in the morning was a group of zebra grazing contentedly. Then we came across an African spoonbill, which is one of the ibis family. Anywhere where there's a patch of water, it's always worth stopping for a closer look, because there's generally some sign of life. And we watched this guy swinging his bill from side to side in the water to catch fish, mollusks, crustaceans, insects, etc. We also came across a blacksmith plover on that same patch of, well, I should actually call them lapwing, because they've been reclassified, but this is another one of the common wetland residents. And we came across some white-faced whistling duck. These guys very gregarious. At the sites that they favor most of all, you can see huge flocks of many hundreds at a time if you're lucky. Funnily enough, they're also found in South America, but I suspect that might be human introduction. We came across a warthog or a bush pig, which always have a slightly comical air about them. And then as dusk was falling towards the end of our afternoon game drive, we came across another big single male lion, which, as we settled down to watch it, turned into two single male lions, presumably two brothers. And we watched them as they came down to the riverbank and drink. And it's a magical experience, just sitting there in the vehicle quietly, taking as long as you like, watching animals going about their business. And so we watched until the sun went down. So after 3 nights in Moremi Game Reserve, we then proceed northeast to Kwai. So that means we exit through the North Gate, and there's a tiny little tongue of land just after North Gate, which is the Kwai Community Reserve. And it lies between the big ticket attractions, arguably, of Moremi Game Reserve and Chobe National Park. But there's no fences, so the wildlife can move around freely. And the Kwai River, which runs through that patch, is the northernmost overflow of the Okavango River. And here you can see the extent of the Okavango Delta. Kwai Community Trust, where we're heading, is area NG19, where we'll spend most of the time, and NG18, but we don't really have an opportunity to get that far north. But together, this is a private concession of 180,000 hectares, so it's huge. And we start the day, and remember, this is the transit day. We're still driving from one to the other. We got a bit of a surprise at breakfast, as a pack of wild dogs ran right through the middle of our campsite as we were having breakfast. Barely possible to grab a camera and get a shot. Fortunately, most people had cameras with them. There's a maxim in that: always carry your camera, even when you're going to eat a meal. Fascinating creatures. We'll see more of them later on. But then out on our morning drive, we spotted waterbuck, easily identifiable, as they all seem to have sat on a freshly painted toilet seat. And as they were looking around, somebody else was looking at them, obviously thinking about lunch. We then spotted a pair of ground hornbills, juveniles. They're one of the 2 species of ground hornbill that are found in Africa. They feed on insects and small animals. But then we came across the wild dogs, once again, running right down the middle of a bush airstrip. And it's amazing, when they're moving at speed, they kind of lollop along. They don't look as though they're traveling fast, but they travel with such huge economy of effort that they can cover huge distances without tiring. Our mid-morning coffee stop, typically we stop for tea, coffee and muffins and a bit of a leg stretch and a pee. But even then, there's still lots to keep us occupied. We're back watching Ellies again. In fact, one of the Ellies here got a little bit worried by our presence and gave us a mock charge just to warn us not to go any further. Our bird life of the morning kicked off with an African sacred ibis, which is native to Africa and the Middle East, where in Egyptian times they were linked to the god Tot, the man who had the head of an ibis, who was I think the god of wisdom. We spotted greater kudu again. These guys stay undercover most of the time. They kind of rely on the thickets for protection, so you rarely see them out in the open, and their brown stripy coat acts as really good camouflage. Normally seen in bachelor herds, but you see solitary ones every now and then. There's very few man-made landmarks in this part of the world, so a common or garden bridge, and this is Third Bridge, is a useful reference point when you're navigating. Just helps you get your bearings. And it was close to Third Bridge that we caught our first sight of a giraffe. I think he feels that he's hiding in the bush and we can't actually see him somehow, but it's just a little bit too obvious. So that was transit day. Our first full day in Kauai started with a magnificent sighting of elephants at dawn. And I don't know whether you heard, but just last week, the IUCN revealed that there are only 40,000 elephants, savanna, that's savanna and forest elephants, only 40,000 remaining in the world. So they are now very firmly on the red list as an endangered species. Bird life for the day started with the turako, a grey luri, or a grey go-away bird, so called because of their call, which is a kind of quay, quay, quay. When excited, they raise their crest, as you can see in this one, almost vertically. When they fly, they seem a bit slow and labored, but when you see them hopping around in treetops and running along limbs of trees and jumping from branch to branch, they're more agile then than they are in the air. This is the Kwai River, and in fact there was rather more water in the Kwai River than we'd seen anywhere else previously. And this is the time of the year when the flow is making its way perceptibly, because if you look at the margins of a river, particularly where there's sand, you can see the trickle of water moving and extending as you look. And this is water that's coming down from the Angola highlands in order to fill the delta. Now, the rains in Angola took place, 2-3 months before. So it's taken this long for the water to arrive. And water in that sort of quantity inevitably means hippos. And anywhere where you look, any kind of pool, there's almost invariably a pod of hippos kind of whiling away the day, doing the hippo thing. Water also attracts a lot of bird life. And here you can see a mayor's parrot, which is locally very common, and the glossy Burchell's starling. We'll see both of them a bit closer up later on. And elephants are great fans of water as well. So it gives us a chance to get close to this. This was a great tusker. We enjoyed watching him for the best part of an hour, just watching him going out of his business. As we're in the community reserve now, rather than in a national park rules don't apply, so we can actually get out of the vehicles and do a little bit of a walk around. Now, it's not a walking safari, but it's nice to be able to get off the vehicle and stretch your legs in the middle of the day, because while we're in the national parks or Moreni Game Reserve, we can only stop at designated stopping places for tea, coffee, and loo breaks. More bird life on the riverbanks. This is a pied kingfisher just about to dive. And then that parrot that we saw before, the mayor's brown parrot. It's a very inauspicious name, a brown parrot, and yet it's got a turquoise belly, a blue rump, yellow carpals, and markings on the head. I think it deserves better. This is a parrot that's quite commonly bred for the pet trade. It's small, relatively quiet, but it's able to learn quite a good vocabulary. More hippos. Nice to see hippos out on the bank with their companion yellow-billed oxpeckers sitting up on their backs, picking the ticks and the insects off. It's quite unusual to see them out of water during the day. And then we got the famous muck-spreading hippo tail, which acts as a propeller. So this is the kind of, does my bum look big in this shot? And then it's always nice to see a mum and a babe together, and we watch these two and just watch them doing their thing. There's no hurry to move on. We can take as much time as we need. And it's fascinating just getting a view and also hearing Dish explaining the behavior and the habits of the hippo. Wherever there's water in Africa, you're never far from that unmistakable cry of the African fish eagle, whose haunting song is one of the overriding memories of Africa's rivers, lakes, estuaries, and lagoons. And another of the great birds of Africa, quite widely found, is the electrifying colours of the lilac-breasted roller with its lovely plumage, invariably perched pretty conspicuously, and they're often very approachable. They let you get quite close before they fly. Magpie shrikes are also a fairly common resident of acacia savanna and the grassy understory. And then we came across wild dog once again. It's fantastic to have so many sightings of what is one of the most endangered predator species of all. And at the end of the day, we saw more elephants heading off into the sunset. So next day, which is our second day in Kwai, we start early on the riverbank with the distinctive hammerhead shape of a hammercock, which is the only bird in its family, although it's kind of distantly related to pelicans and the shoebill that we saw earlier. It's usually silent when it's alone, but when in pairs or when you see them in groups, they get quite noisy. Then we spotted a coppery-tailed kukal, fluffing up to keep warm, because at this time of year, I was there in June, and the mornings are surprisingly crisp and chilly. So you need to think about wearing warm layers on the vehicles to keep warm. And the cuckoo is a cuckoo species, as the name would suggest, native to southern Africa, typically lives in swamp and dense vegetation near rivers or on the floodplains. And then we got another leopard. I mean, quite unexpectedly, but we always travel in hope. So we watched this guy for a while, because you just can't really get enough of these extraordinary, graceful places. In some places, they're really hard to see, but our luck seemed to be in. And we just enjoyed watching this animal, which, well, you can see from the tail, turned out to be not just one, but there were two sisters. And we spent an awful lot of the morning just watching them, grooming, sitting, watching, doing what leopards do, which was a great pleasure and indeed a privilege. Rounded off the morning with a couple of bee eaters. This is the first one, the insectivorous bee eater, the little bee eater. Pretty common. I mean, there's about 27 species of bee eaters altogether. Most of them found in Africa and across Asia, but there's a couple in Europe, south of Europe, and in Australasia, New Guinea as well, but typically have this richly colored plumage. So this was a pair that we watched before coming across yet another lion, another big male. We saw some more waterbuck, we saw some more elephant, and we spotted the southern ground hornbill. These guys live to maybe 50, 60 years. So they're pretty impressive birds. And then we saw some more red lechwe. These are the males. Remember, we saw it right back at the beginning, lyre-shaped horns. They live in marshes. They're pretty sophisticated because they live up to their knees in water, obviously as protection from predators. They have very long rear legs, and their legs are covered with a water-repelling substance on the lower leg that enables them to run fast in water, which is quite remarkable, really. Bird life, well, this is the white-backed vulture, the most common of all the vultures on the savannah, invariably the first one to arrive at a kill. Another raptor that we saw, these guys are often seen in pairs. This is the African hawk eagle, which hunts with its feet, takes small game birds such as spurfowl or guinea fowl, small mammals, occasionally reptiles and insects. But the interesting thing about these guys is the pair works cooperatively. One flushes the game out and the other one waits to strike. Pretty widespread across sub-Saharan Africa. Another sighting of our little bee eater. And then we saw our first black-backed jackal of the trip, as well as some wild dogs doing what wild dogs do best, which is absolutely nothing at all. They sleep all day long. And then it's as if there's a signal. They all get up, and after a bit of social behavior, grooming, etc., they move off as one and start the hunt. We started seeing more giraffe here in Kwai. Always impressive, particularly that massive, strong tongue, which is so tough that it can eat the leaves from thorny branches of acacia trees. And it was here that we saw our first ostrich as well, the common ostrich, which is another common resident of the plains, the world's largest bird, flightless, of course, and one of two species of ostrich, along with the one that hails from Somalia. Nowadays, they're found in the wild only in Africa, in open semi-arid habitats, such as savannas. And then, well, strange sight to behold, an impala, not exactly in the best of health, up a tree. And, well, it was fairly obvious because the culprit was still very much at the scene of the crime, completely unfazed by our presence. So we actually managed to get pretty close, and this guy was just enjoying a bit of postprandial chilling. I mean, it's remarkable to get so amazingly close to these guys, and you know, you feel such a connection. I mean, I could have spent all day watching this one animal, but once again, to our utter surprise, just a couple of 100 meters away, there were some more wild dogs doing almost exactly the same thing, lazing and just lying around waiting for hunting time. We spotted a dikop, thick knee, which is one of the waders that's found in tropical regions in Central and Southern Africa. These guys are quite interesting because they sometimes feign injury to lure a predator away from the nest. There's all kinds of strategies that birds have for getting inquisitive predators away from anywhere where their young might be, but this one is pretty effective. And indeed, we spotted a predator, a lioness, but here there were cubs around, and we watched the cubs stalking each other and play fighting in preparation for greater sport to come, because of course that's how they learn to hunt. But we saw lots of really tender family moments with lionesses and the cubs in the pride. And this is, I think, well, it's probably my second favorite shot of that trip, because my favorite shot is definitely that one, a pretty big factor, you know, isn't it? Just a lovely shot. More predator, black-backed jackal once again, solitary creatures. And it's strange having seen, you know, wild dogs in groups and even, you know, 2 leopard at a time, prides of lions, to see these guys almost invariably on their own. Another ostrich out on the grassy plain. Another big ground birds that we saw was the northern black korhaan, which is also known as the white-quilled bustard. This is a pretty common species, quite widely spread across the grassland. And then as Kwai, because we're still in Kwai, as Kwai isn't a national park, but a community reserve, here we can do a night drive. In the national parks, we're not allowed out after dark. We have to be back in camp. But here we can do a night drive to see some of the nocturnal species. So we can either extend our sunset drive and stay out late, or we can come back a little bit earlier, have dinner, and head out again. And this is a bush baby, or a galago. This is a not very good photograph at all of a wildcat, because nocturnal safaris set a new and even greater photographic challenge for me. And it's very rare that I can actually rise to the occasion. But when you do finally get it all right and get your exposures and control of light and shutter speed right, it's very, very rewarding. Next day, we headed straight back first thing in the morning to find the same pride of lions that we'd been looking at the previous day, the one with the cubs. And we saw, I mean, just more activity, more family activity. But today, it was a little bit different. Here's the group of cubs, but just down the road was a big male. And it was obvious that the mothers, or the females, were rather more circumspect with this big male around, because a big male lion can do some serious damage, and it's not above killing young lions. So on the basis of a bird in the hand, we also went back to the same tree where we'd been yesterday, the one with the impala. Our leopard was still there, up in the tree, gnawing on something, but there was absolutely no sign of the impala. There wasn't time to finish it, so your guess is as good as mine. Maybe something bigger might have brought it down and made off with it. But if the store cupboard is empty, maybe it's time to get up and about and head off to refill it. But this magnificent leopard was just so watchable. Once again, I think we spent probably an hour and a half just watching this single animal. Just amazing. It was almost as if it was posing for us. Very relaxed, just lying around, enjoying the sun. It seems like a big effort to move at all. This is Burchell's sand grouse, which, as its name would suggest, is a kind of grouse that lives in sandy conditions. It's named after William John Burchell, who was a British or an English naturalist who gave his name to Burchell's zebra, Burchell's starling that we've seen, both of them today, Burchell's cuckoo, Burchell's courser, Burchell's lizard, and there's even a Burchell's ant. But these guys, the sand grouse, are pretty remarkable because the parents bring water to their young in specially adapted breast feathers. They soak their breasts and then carry the water in to the young. So that really brings us to an end of our visit to the Kwai Community Concession. And on day 8 of our trip, we transfer northwards, and it's a very short transfer that takes us into Chobe National Park. And here we're spreading, on this particular occasion, to the northern end, up to Savuti Marsh. But our transfer drive to our next campsite is spread over a full day, because we take a picnic lunch with us so we can stop en route. And that gives time for our previous camp to be broken, loaded onto a support vehicle, driven to the new campsite, and then the camp crew work wonders in getting camp up. So by the time we arrive at the end of our full day game drive, most of the camp is up and ready for us. Here we saw yellow mongoose, which is also known as the red meerkat, carnivorous ground dweller, lives in a colony of burrows with up to 20, well, I suppose between 20 and 30 people, and then a nearby midden, a separate latrine. And their social structure is based all around the breeding pair and the most recent offspring. Plus, they look out, I'm glad to say, as being one of advancing years, they look after the elderly and the adult relatives of the pair. And the alpha male scent marks all of his tribe each and every day, which I don't know if that's the kind of treatment you necessarily like to put up with. Anyway, here's Mr. Burchell's starling, the Burchell's glossy starling, which is the largest of all the starlings. Nice to see it so well lit, and you can really appreciate this iridescent plumage, native to the woodland and the dry savanna, particularly associated with camel thorn trees in the dry Kalahari area. And then in the afternoon, we headed off to a well-known den to meet a new animal for us, our first hyena of the trip. And here, one female had been left on guard with the pups while the pack had obviously headed off to forage. So we sat for a while and watched the pups until they emerged from the den and started messing around as pups did. Although I have to say the female was pretty good at keeping a lookout and was very quick to rein them in at the slightest thing of anything untoward. But great to watch this new predator. They're hugely social creatures, very much like wild dogs. So there's lots of mutual grooming and just interactive behavior that's good to watch. We saw red-billed spurfowl, also known as the francolin, which is one of the pheasant family, found quite commonly in tropical, semi-tropical scrubland and grassland. 2 lionesses, them just keeping an eye on their cubs. And this was one of the few times that we had an opportunity to indulge in sundowners, that great African safari tradition of an alcoholic or otherwise drink at the close of the day. But until now, we've literally had no chance because we can't do it in the national parks because we can't get out of the vehicle. And frankly, we've been too busy around the time of sunset to want to do it anyway, because our time has been filled with wildlife and then scampering back to camp so as not to contravene the park rules. So day 11 comes, sadly, our last day on safari, and we drive from the Savuti Marsh area of Chobe National Park, following the river, the Chobe River, up to Kasane in the north. And well, we reached there by kind of just after lunch. We have a picnic lunch en route because we've bid farewell to the camp crew by this time who are returning to base. But this takes us all the way through Chobe National Park, and then after Chobe National Park, although it's not marked on the map, we get Chobe Forest Reserve. So there's lots to see en route. It's a long drive. It's 5 or 6 hours drive, and much of it is on the most appalling sand road, really bumpy. But it's not without rewards, such as these 2 giraffes, who we spotted knocking absolute billio out of each other. They were really laying into each other with their heads and their necks. You could hear the blows from several hundred meters away. We were very fortunate in that we came across a herd of sable antelope crossing the main road, which we're back on tarmac by this stage. Oh, the joy of getting to the end of the dirt road. These guys, very elegant animals, typically live in herds of anything from 10 to 30 females, plus 1 bull. And the other males form bachelor herds. And when there's too many females with 1 bull, the herd divides, the females go off and find a new dominant male, like this guy, fine male with these huge, absolutely massive curved horns. These guys are important grazers, browsers. White-crowned lapwing, or the plover, wader with those unmistakable yellow wattles, puts up a very noisy defense to defend its nest against intruders, which include hippos. They're actually capable of seeing off a hippo with the palaver that they make. And then, well, arriving at the hotel, because we stay in a very pucker hotel for our final night of the trip in Kasane, we take a boat trip in an aluminium-hulled launch out on the Chobe River. And that makes a really pleasant change, because when the engine's off, we can just float with the current and watch birds such as this pied kingfisher. Along the banks, we might see a monitor lizard making its way with its tongue, its sense organ, flicking all the while. Inevitably, we get more kingfishers. This is another pied kingfisher. We'd probably get another blacksmith plover, little egret fishing as a member of the heron family. Pretty common sight. It was sad. I mean, it was almost hunted to extinction at one time for feathers for ladies' hats. Crocodile, inevitably, on the riverbank, keeping its cool in the sultry afternoon heat. We saw a reed cormorant. I think it was a reed cormorant. It could just have been an African darter, but these guys can dive to considerable depths, although they usually feed close to the surface, taking small, slow-moving fish, pretty common. The highlight of that afternoon was seeing this huge tusker swimming across what was obviously a very deep channel, because it was forced to use its trunk as a snorkel. And it was presumably the reason why it was crossing the channel was just to get to this island, because there was such a wealth of lush grass. It was great for fodder. More bird life, the grey heron, loads of them waiting patiently as always to pounce on a passing fish. We saw African stonechat in the reed beds, which is one of the old world flycatchers, a member of the thrush family, at least that's how it's classified. We saw the magnificent yellow-billed stork, also known as the wood stork, or sometimes the wood ibis, although it is very much a true stork rather than an ibis. It's not the breeding season, so it didn't have that pink plumage that's distinct with that. And then we saw another heron, Squacko heron, the old world heron. We saw one final herd of elephant on the riverbank, and then we enjoyed watching a group of humans. This is how you can do it. You can hire the boat, you can hire the camera, you can hire the lens, and all you need is a memory card. So with a final African sunset, we have our last dinner in the hotel, and the next day we fly from Kasane via Joburg back to London. We saw leopard, lion, wild dogs, absolutely everywhere, all 3 locations. But what these images can't convey is the sheer joy of camping in the bush, surrounded by the sounds of nature. The safari starts just outside the flap of your tent, which brings us to a rather late conclusion. Sorry about that. I've overshot. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to post them, although we're rather late for questions. Chris, I can't hear you for some reason.
Beg your pardon, Brian, sorry. You'll notice that I'm out on the African plains, Brian, with lions behind me.
We've leapt, haven't we? Oh, right. We've got elephants. We've got something that looks probably like Canada as well.
Oh yes, indeed. Yes, we're sort of transcontinental. So look, to everybody listening, I must apologise if I'm bombed by my dogs. I had to move location. I wasn't expecting to be posing questions to Brian, but it is slightly easier in this case if I do. So Brian, you have given us a wonderful set of images, and that's been commented on by a number of people about how nice your photos are, and a lovely account of the trip. There are a few questions, though of course you have answered virtually everything, but just a couple of things. 2 or 3 people have asked about whether they can charge camera batteries in camp and how that works.
Very easy. It's done from the battery of the vehicles overnight.
Great. Okay, so no issues.
You can charge them during the day because there's an AC/DC inverter, and there's normally a bank of sockets, and indeed there are normally adapters for USB sockets, 3-pin square, 3-pin round, 2-pin square, 2-pin round, all kinds of things. But if you have a particular battery that needs charger that needs a particular lead, you'd be well advised to take your own connection with you just in case.
Yep. Okay, that's super. So
also, I mean, obviously an extra battery comes in handy as well. So while you're using one, you're charging the other, because with 6 people all using cameras in one vehicle, you can't necessarily be charging camera batteries plus laptops, iPads, whatever else.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no, that's very good. Thank you. James has just asked that I confirm the name of the trip, or that we confirm the name of the trip. It's called Best of Botswana, James. That is the trip. And it runs over a number of different departures. We have a number of departures of Best of Botswana. Fiona has commented on the fact that in your photographs, it looks as though people are wearing jackets because it was obviously relatively cool. But though not necessarily on every one of our departures, right?
No, and certainly not throughout the day. In June, which is probably the coldest time of the year of all. I mean, this is the dry season in June. Just to point out, it's not the wet season when all the migrant birds are there to breed. It's the dry season, and that means it's certainly cold at night. First thing in the morning, when you're sitting on a game vehicle with the draft, the airflow created by moving on the vehicle, it can get bitterly cold. And I would certainly take a warm hat. I would pop a pair of gloves in your pocket, and I would rely on being able to layer to keep warm. But as the morning goes on, by kind of 10 o'clock in the morning, you will have peeled off most layers, and you'll be in shorts and short sleeves for the rest of the day. At night, the beds have duvets, there are extra blankets, and you are given what the camp crew charmingly call a bush baby to put in your bed to keep you warm. It's a hot water bottle. Sadly, you don't get a real bush baby.
Oh no, how disappointing, Brian. You just put a whole bunch of people off traveling now because they're not getting a real bush baby in bed. Okay, super. Thank you for that. Of course, if you're traveling on one of the later departures, I mean, as you say, June, July, and August, it'll be cold morning and night.
September, October.
Some of the other departures. I beg your pardon.
September, October, getting very warm.
Getting very warm. Yeah, exactly. James has also asked if you are planning to lead any of the other trips to Botswana, and best of Botswana, I think I don't know the answer to that. But
Neither do I, probably enough.
I think you need to thrash that one out with Dan, Brian. Okay, so that was that. One or two people have asked whether it's possible to extend the trip. So obviously we have the predefined trip with which you've just described. But of course, it would be possible to extend the trip and go off into the Okavango Delta and go elsewhere, go up into Zambia,
Well, I
down
mean,
to South Africa.
the thing is, from Kasane, it's an easy hop along to Victoria Falls as well.
Yeah,
crossing the river and then heading along to Vic Falls. It's within what, half a day's drive.
Oh yes, or I think considerably less now.
And there are delightful places to stay on the river on the way along to Vic Falls. You can stay on an island in a really rustic chic camp on an island. Yeah, lots of lovely places to stay up there. Or you can go into Zambia. You could go into the Caprivi Strip and head back down into Namibia. All kinds of things are possible.
I think, though, the question quite specifically, Alan, and thank you for reiterating it. I had got that. Was about getting back to the Okavango Delta. It's very, very simple for us to extend this trip into the Okavango Delta. So you could do a pre-tour extension and go into the Okavango Delta, go into the heart of the Delta prior to starting our Best of Botswana trip. But it's very easy. We can fly you by light aircraft from Kasane back down directly into the Delta. So it's very, very straightforward. And we can come back to you, Alan, with more specific information on that. But either myself or Dan or any of the guys in our wildlife team will be able to help with that. But yes, it's pretty straightforward. Brian,
I would have thought that most of the Delta camps are within an hour's flying time.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Or Kasane at the end.
Yeah,
so it's very easy to do.
Yeah, and yeah, it's very simple, and there are some super camps, and it's quite a nice way to end a mobile camping trip, is to spend 3 or 4 nights, sometimes in a nice lodge, or in the Delta, or as you suggest, perhaps at Victoria Falls or elsewhere. Extend your safari into South Africa, Namibia, Zambia, any number of other places. Somebody has posed the question, Chris has posed the question, that's not me. Is there only one boat trip on this particular itinerary of ours? You mentioned the boat trip in Chobe.
Yes, there is, and that's because you're seeing so much from the vehicle, and it really is easy to see high quality wildlife. I suppose there might possibly be the chance of doing a traditional Mikoro trip, a trip in the dugout canoe, while staying in the Kwai Community Reserve, i.e. outside the national parks. Because in the national parks, you essentially have to be staying at a lodge in order to do a canoe trip. But in Kwai, there certainly are operators that do day trips. But frankly, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think you're going to see any more or any better than, I mean, you've seen the fantastic variety, let alone the regularity with which we saw the big, the major species, as well as the bird life.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's an awful lot to be gained from the extra expense.
It's a different experience, though, isn't it? And people would may like to do that just for the experience. I mean, that would be one of the reasons why you might do an extension into the Delta, quite specifically, just in order to have that lovely, peaceful, tranquil experience. It's a different thing, as you say. You're not necessarily seeing more wildlife, but just enjoying a different view of a spectacularly beautiful place. Are you still there, Brian?
I'm still there. Yeah. No, I'm in total agreement.
Good. That's it. That's always good news. Uh, and look, I'll just finish off. One or two people have asked about single supplements. Yes, there is a single supplement, and it is, of course, possible to travel as a single on the trip. I think, Brian, we should end it there. There are some questions I haven't been able to pose to you just because of time. I'm conscious that it's now 2 o'clock and we say it's an hour long presentation. Brian, thanks ever so much. And to those people whose questions we haven't been able to answer online now, we will get back to you in the course of the coming 24 hours or so. Brian, thanks ever so much. That was super.